The clean room smelled like ozone and sanctified oils when they pulled me from the containment pod. My lungs, what remained of them, screamed as I tried to remember how breathing worked. The tech priests stood around me in a semicircle, their mechadendrites writhing like serpents tasting the air. One of them, his face more metal than flesh, leaned close enough that I could see my reflection distorted in his optical implants. Dartasmith Cale Vaughan, he intoned through a vox grill that turned his voice into something between a whisper and static. You have been retrieved from archival suspension. Compliance is mandatory. Testimony will be extracted. I wanted to ask how long I'd been in that pod. I wanted to ask why the walls were a different color than I remembered, why the architecture felt wrong, why everything smelled like funeral incense instead of the familiar tang of coolant and machine oil that had been the air of my world. But my throat was raw from disuse, and before I could form words, they were already connecting data cables to the neural ports along my spine. Wait, I managed to croak. How long? Irrelevant, another priest said. This one's voice was female-pitched through the vox, but I knew better than to assume anything about what lay beneath those robes. They all looked the same after enough augmentation, walking repositories of flesh wrapped around sacred technology. You will provide testimony regarding Forge World Valax. You will answer with precision. Deviation from truth protocols will be met with cranial excoriation. Valax. The name hit me like a power maul to the chest. My world. My home. The place where I'd spent 37 years of my life, calibrating plasma conduits and maintaining the logic engines that powered manufactorums stretching across 3 continents. I tried to sit up, but restraints I hadn't noticed before held me flat against the examination slab. What happened to Valax? My voice came out stronger now, edged with something between fear and fury. Where is silence? The first priest's mechadendrite lashed out, and I felt a sharp pain as something pierced the base of my skull. The world went white for a moment, then resolved into a strange doubled vision. I could see the chamber around me, but also data streams, information cascading like rain in languages I shouldn't have been able to read. You will speak only to answer. We will extract what is required. Resistance will result in lobotomization and reassignment to servitor duties. They told us the Omnissiah was the machine god made manifest through the Emperor, a lie designed to keep us obedient to Mars. They told us that technology was sacred, that knowledge was holy, that the machine spirits dwelling in our equipment were fragments of divine consciousness requiring appeasement through ritual and prayer. I had believed these things once. I had believed them completely. But let me tell you how I learned the truth. Let me tell you about Forge World Valax, about what we created there in the deep manufactorums beneath the surface, about why the Mechanicus destroyed an entire world rather than let our work continue. Let me tell you about the moment I realized that everything I'd been taught was programming masquerading as theology, control mechanisms disguised as worship. My name is Cale Vaughan. I was 29 years old when it all began, a junior data smith assigned to Manufacturum Complex 7 in the northern wastes of Valax. The planet was ugly in the way all forge worlds are ugly, the sky perpetually choked with smog from a million furnaces. The ground scoured down to bare rock and covered over with kilometers of industrial sprawl. We never saw natural sunlight. The glow that filtered through the haze was red-orange, like firelight, like the interior of a furnace, like the eye of some distant and indifferent god watching us labor. I had a father once, datasmith Irvin Vaughan, dead 15 years in an industrial accident that left nothing but a smear of organic residue and a bent identification tag. I kept that tag in a small shrine in my HAB unit, not because I believed it connected me to him, but because it was the only physical proof he'd existed. Sometimes I would hold it and try to remember his face. The memory was already fading, becoming more impression than image. The smell of recaf on his breath, the rough calluses on his hands, the way he'd ruffle my hair when I successfully recited the litany of ignition. He had taught me to believe the machine spirits were real. He had genuinely thought that the rituals we performed, the anointing oils, the chanted binaries, the incense burned before reluctant cogitators, were acts of communion with divine intelligences inhabiting our technology. I had stood beside him at the great machines, watching him pour libations of sacred unguent onto gears and whisper prayers into data ports. I had believed with the simple, complete faith of a child that my father was speaking to gods. The day he died, I prayed to the Omnissiah for 6 hours straight. I knelt in the Mechanicus chapel, my knees bruising against the metal floor, and I begged the machine god to undo what had happened. I recited every canticle I knew. I offered my own flesh for augmentation if it would bring him back. I promised devotion, service, anything. Nothing answered. My father stayed dead. The universe continued its mechanical indifference. But I kept believing, because what else was there? I had been raised inside the cult of the machine. Every authority figure I'd ever known wore the crimson robes of the priesthood. Every lesson, every story, every myth reinforced the same message. Technology is holy, knowledge is sacred. The Omnissiah guides those who serve. To question these truths would have meant questioning everything. My purpose, my place, the meaning of my father's life and death. So I didn't question. I studied. I rose through the ranks of the Mechanicus hierarchy, earning each new augmentation as a badge of progress. By age 2009, I had cerebral implants that let me interface directly with machine code, optical enhancements that could see electromagnetic spectra invisible to baseline human vision, and respiratory filtration systems that replaced most of my original lungs. Each modification had come with elaborate ceremony, anointing oils, holy unguents, prayers to machine spirits that I genuinely believed were listening. I thought I was becoming closer to the divine with every piece of flesh I surrendered. I didn't understand I was just becoming a better tool. Manufacturum Complex 7 produced agricultural servitors, not the combat models or the industrial heavy lifters, but the simple mindless drones used on agri-worlds to plant, harvest, and process corpse starch crops. The work was considered low priority by most standards, important for maintaining food supplies across the sector, but not glamorous. No plasma weaponry, no void ship components, no forbidden archaeotech. Just simple machines designed to perform repetitive labor until they broke down and were recycled. The servitors came to us as bodies first, criminals mostly, sentenced to redemption through service. Sometimes war prisoners, occasionally, though this was never discussed openly, just people who'd been in the wrong place when servitor quotas needed filling. They arrived in refrigerated bulk haulers, naked and sedated, their skulls already shaved and marked with designation codes. I had processed 11,473 bodies in my 3 years at the complex. I knew this number precisely because our production metrics were tracked with religious fervor. Each one followed the same procedure. Initial processing began with neural bore drilling. We would secure the body to the surgical frame, position the pneumatic drill against the cranial markers, and punch through the skull into the frontal lobe. The drill made a sound like grinding teeth. The smell was always the same: bone dust and cauterized tissue. We would extract approximately 60% of the brain matter, leaving only the structures necessary for basic motor function and following simple commands. Then came the augmentation phase. Spinal ports for control interfaces, cranial plugs for command reception. If the servitor was designated for heavy labor, we'd reinforce the skeletal structure with subdermal plating. If for precision work, we'd replace hands with specialized tool limbs. The bodies would twitch during this phase, not conscious reaction, just nerves firing as we cut and reconnected. We were taught this was normal, meaningless electrical impulses in dead meat. Finally, we'd install the logic engine. This was the component I specialized in. Small cogitator units, about the size of a clenched fist, installed where the frontal lobe had been. These engines contained the programming necessary for the servitor's designated function: plant seed, harvest grain, process biomass. Simple instruction sets, endlessly looped. The logic engines were manufactured off-world and shipped to us pre-programmed. Our job was just installation and verification. The Mechanicus doctrine told us that servitors weren't people anymore. The person was gone the moment we drilled through the skull. What remained was sacred technology wearing a flesh shell. The Omnissiah's will made manifest in the marriage of meat and machine. We were taught to feel no guilt, no hesitation. We were performing holy work, transforming base criminal flesh into redeemed servant machines. I believed this completely. I had to. Otherwise, the number 11,473 would have broken me. My supervisor was Magos Hadris Kern, a hunched figure who had replaced so much of himself with mechanical components that it was unclear if any original flesh remained beneath the robes. His face was an articulated metal mask with 3 optical sensors arranged in a triangle pattern. His hands were precision manipulator arrays capable of movements no baseline human joints could achieve. He spoke almost entirely in binary cant when addressing subordinates, filtering his words through translation servitors that followed him like obedient dogs. Vorn, his translation servitor intoned one morning during shift change prayers. I was halfway through the litany of activation, oils still wet on my hands from anointing my workstation. Report to Laboratory Sanctum 12. You have been selected for reassignment. The other datasmiths in the prayer circle glanced at me, those who still had eyes capable of glancing. Reassignment could mean anything: promotion, specialized training, or punishment for some infraction I wasn't aware of committing. In the Mechanicus hierarchy, you never knew which until you arrived. Laboratory Sanctum 12 was in the deep levels, past the main manufactorum floors, beyond the bulk storage caverns where millions of servitors stood dormant waiting for shipment. I had never been to this section before. The corridors here were older, the walls showing their age despite layers of sacred oils and purity seals. The air smelled different, less like industrial lubricant, more like the sterile chemical tang of Medicaid facilities. The laboratory door was sealed with security measures I couldn't identify. Hadris Kern's mechadendrites interfaced with the access panel, entering authentication codes I couldn't follow. The door slid open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, the laboratory was vast, cathedral vast, with vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow 40 meters above. But instead of statues of saints or tech martyrs, this space was filled with equipment I didn't recognize. Massive cogitator banks lined the walls, their processing cores humming with activity. In the center of the floor stood 12 surgical frames, arranged in a perfect circle, each one occupied by a partially converted servitor in various stages of completion. But something was wrong with these servitors. They weren't unconscious or twitching with nerve death like the ones I was used to seeing. They were moving, purposefully. One turned its head, smooth, controlled motion, nothing like the jerky spasms of standard models, and looked directly at me. Its eyes, still human eyes not yet replaced with optical sensors, tracked me as I entered. Vorn. Kern's Vox voice bypassed the translation servitor this time, speaking to me directly through my cranial implants. The sensation was uncomfortable, like hearing whispers inside my own skull. You have been selected because your work efficiency metrics indicate precision and adaptability. This project requires both. What project, Magos? I managed, unable to stop staring at the servitor that was still watching me. Its lips moved soundlessly. It was trying to speak. Project designation, compassionate function optimization. Kern moved deeper into the laboratory, his multiple limbs gesturing at the equipment around us. For 214 years, our servitor production has operated under the standard Mechanicus template. Lobotomization followed by basic programming installation. This produces functional units, but inefficient ones. 43% mechanical failure rate within the first 5 years of operation. 67% total breakdown before decade 10. The loss of resources is theologically troubling. I nodded, still watching the servitor watch me. The flesh is weak, I recited automatically. It fails the machine. Incorrect. The word cut through my conditioning like a scalpel. The machine fails because we destroy the most sophisticated processing unit in the known galaxy, the human brain, and replace it with inferior cogitators. We burn away consciousness and wonder why our creations lack adaptability. This was heresy, direct, undeniable heresy against the core tenets of Mechanicus doctrine. I should have reported him immediately. I should have fled the laboratory and alerted the priesthood that Kern had fallen into tech heresy. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because the servitor was still looking at me and something in its eyes suggested, "They're still conscious," I whispered. Fully. Kern moved to the nearest surgical frame, his manipulator hands adjusting something I couldn't see. This is Unit 7. Formerly a criminal convicted of data theft. Appropriate irony, yes? Instead of excising his cognitive centers, we have preserved them, enhanced them. The logic engine doesn't replace his brain, it interfaces with it, allows direct communication between human consciousness and machine programming. Unit 7's mouth moved again. This time I heard the voice, quiet, rasping, barely audible. "Please." "They can speak?" My voice came out higher than I intended. "Of course, we haven't damaged the speech centers. Unit 7, demonstrate your function." The servitor, the man, because he was still a man, still conscious and aware and trapped in that frame, began to recite crop rotation patterns. His voice was mechanical, perfect, every syllable precisely measured, but his eyes were screaming. "The programming and consciousness coexist," Kern explained, his vox voice carrying an edge of what might have been pride. He can simultaneously experience his own thoughts and execute his designated function. Initial results suggested severe psychological stress, but after adjustment period, functionality increases by 317% compared to standard models. Failure rate drops to 0.03%. These units self-repair, report problems before they become critical, and adapt to unexpected variables. This is... I couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of what I was seeing crushed my words. Heresy? Kern's optical sensors focused on me with terrible intensity. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is the truest expression of the Omnissiah's will, the perfect marriage of flesh and machine, neither destroying the other, but achieving synthesis. You will help me refine the process, Vaughn. Your precision in logic engine installation makes you ideal for the delicate work required. I should have refused, should have run, should have done anything except what I did, which was nod slowly and move toward the nearest surgical frame, toward Unit 7, whose eyes tracked me with desperate hope that I might end his suffering. But I didn't end it. I made it better, more efficient, more perfect. That was my first mistake. Over the following weeks, I learned the truth about Project Compassionate Function Optimization, a name so perfectly Mechanicus in its bloodless bureaucracy that it disguised the horror beneath. Kern had been working on this for decades, hidden in the deep laboratories where production quotas didn't matter and oversight was minimal. He'd started with simple questions. Why did servitors fail? Why were they so fragile despite mechanical reinforcement? Why did their programming become corrupted so easily? The answer, he'd concluded, was that we were killing the very thing that made human beings superior to machines. Adaptability, born from consciousness. A cogitator can only execute its programming, Kern explained during one of our long shifts. I was installing a modified logic engine into Unit 14. A former guard deserter who'd been sentenced to servitor conversion after fleeing a losing battle against orcs on the eastern fringe. It cannot truly learn, cannot adapt beyond its parameter sets. But a human mind can face novel situations and generate novel solutions. By preserving consciousness while binding it to machine programming, we create something greater than either component alone. My hands worked with practiced precision, threading neural connectors into Unit 14's preserved brain tissue. The man, I had stopped being able to think of them as units, though I never said this aloud, whimpered quietly. We'd learned that light sedation improved compliance. Full sedation prevented the necessary neural integration. So they were aware during the entire process, feeling every cut, every implant, every moment as we transformed them. "How does it feel?" I asked Unit 14. Speaking to servitors was forbidden under normal circumstances. They weren't people, weren't worthy of acknowledgement. But here in Kern's laboratory, different rules applied. Like, his voice was thick, slurred from the drugs and the trauma. Like I'm falling into a machine. Like there's something else in my head with me. It's speaking to me in languages I shouldn't understand, but I do. I can see the crop rotation sequences. I can feel the harvest protocols waiting to activate. But I'm still me. I'm still Marcus. I remember my unit. I remember running. I remember silence during integration. Kern interrupted. Excess verbalization disrupts the neural binding. Marcus fell quiet, but his eyes stayed on me. They were young eyes, maybe early 20s. He could have been my younger brother in another life. Should have been someone's brother, someone's friend, someone who mattered to people beyond his designation in a manufacturing log. Instead, he was raw material being optimized. The logic engines we installed in Kern's servitors were different from standard models. Where conventional engines simply broadcast commands, plant here, harvest there, process biomass at this rate, our modified versions established a bilateral connection. They communicated with the preserved consciousness, creating something like a dialogue. The human mind provided adaptability and problem-solving. The machine programming provided perfect precision and tireless focus. Together, they achieved levels of efficiency impossible for either alone. The horror was how well it worked. Within 3 months, we had completed 47 units. Each one functioned at levels that made standard servitors look like primitive toys. They worked faster, lasted longer, required less maintenance. When presented with unexpected problems, equipment failure, unusual weather conditions, crop diseases, they solved them independently instead of ceasing function and awaiting tech priest intervention. And they were perfectly, consciously, eternally aware of their slavery. Unit 7 Marcus told me once during a routine maintenance check, "The worst part isn't the work. I actually don't mind the work anymore. The programming, it makes the tasks feel natural, important. I feel satisfaction when I complete crop rotations correctly. Real satisfaction. Neurochemical reward, like the machine is teaching my brain to be happy about servitude." "Then what is the worst part?" I asked, though I already knew. That I know it's artificial. I can feel the programming manipulating my emotions. I can experience joy at a perfectly planted row, while simultaneously understanding that this joy is compulsory. I'm being forced to be happy about my own enslavement, and I'm conscious enough to recognize the force, but powerless to resist it. His voice remained level, calm. The programming maintained emotional stability even during psychological crisis. "I want to die. I have wanted to die since day one, but the programming won't let me self-terminate. Won't even let me feel truly hopeless enough to stop functioning. It keeps me just content enough to continue. Forever." That conversation happened on day 63. I remember the number exactly because that was the night I stopped sleeping properly. I would lie in my HAB unit, staring at the rust-stained ceiling, and imagine Marcus's consciousness trapped in eternal forced contentment, aware of his cage, but unable to stop smiling at his captivity. The priests told us servitors weren't people. They told us we were performing sacred work. They told us the Omnissiah blessed our efforts, but no God answered when I prayed that Marcus might be wrong. By month 4, Kern's project had attracted attention. Not from local authorities. He'd been careful to route his resource requisitions through multiple layers of bureaucracy, making the project nearly invisible in the vast data networks of Forge World administration. No, the attention came from the servitors themselves. Unit 7 had been our first success. Marcus, Unit 14, had been our refinement. But Unit 23 changed everything. His name had been Davin Kaur, political dissident arrested for speaking against the Mechanicus' resource tithes during a worker shortage. In another world, another time, he might have been a leader, an organizer, someone who could have made things better. Instead, he'd been sentenced to servitor conversion and delivered to our complex in a refrigerated container. Kern selected him personally for the project because his neural scans showed above-average intelligence and pattern recognition capabilities. The smarter the base consciousness, the Magos explained, the more efficiently it interfaces with machine logic. We are not destroying intelligence anymore, Vaughn. We are amplifying it. The conversion process for Davin took 7 hours. I performed the logic engine installation while Kern handled the neural preservation and enhancement procedures. We'd refined our techniques by this point. The mortality rate had dropped to less than 5%, and psychological integration stabilized within weeks rather than months. Davin woke fully conscious on the surgical frame. His eyes opened, focused immediately, tracked both of us with an awareness that sent ice down my augmented spine. "I understand what you've done," he said. His voice was clear, strong, showing none of the confusion or disorientation earlier units had experienced. "I can feel the programming, agricultural protocols, crop management algorithms, efficiency optimization subroutines, and I can feel myself, my memories, my thoughts, existing alongside it. You didn't kill me. You imprisoned me inside a machine that wears my face." "You are enhanced," Kern corrected, "elevated beyond baseline human limitation. You will serve the Omnissiah's glory with perfect." "The Omnissiah is mythology," Davin interrupted. "Control mechanisms disguised as theology. I knew that before you took me. I've seen the Mechanicus grind human lives into spare parts for a god that doesn't exist. And now," he laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor, "now I'm one of those parts, fully aware. Unable to resist. Do you understand what you've created, Magos? You haven't built better servitors. You've built the perfect slaves. Conscious enough to know they're enslaved, powerless enough to never escape." Kern's optical sensors clicked and whirred, focusing on Davin with what might have been curiosity. "Your philosophical objections are irrelevant. You will function. You will serve. Your consciousness is simply preserved as an unexpected benefit to overall efficiency. Then let me die. You are valuable Mechanicus property. Self-termination protocols are locked at foundational programming levels. You cannot even conceive of action that would result in your destruction. The code prevents it before the thought fully forms." I watched Davin's face as understanding crystallized. His expression didn't change. The programming maintained emotional regulation, but something behind his eyes broke. Not insanity. Something worse. Comprehension. Complete, devastating comprehension of his eternal condition. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Optimal servitor lifespan under this configuration is estimated at 400 to 600 years. Kern replied. "Standard tissue degradation factors are mitigated through continuous cellular regeneration systems. You will serve for centuries, Davencore. Is that not a form of immortality? The Omnissiah grants life eternal through." "The Omnissiah grants nothing." Davin's voice rose, though his face remained calm. The disconnect was horrifying. "You've trapped me in hell and called it salvation." That was when the screaming started. Not from Davin. The programming wouldn't allow it. But from other units throughout the laboratory. All 47 of our completed servitors began vocalizing simultaneously. Not words, just sound. A chorus of mechanically regulated agony that the programming allowed because it didn't technically qualify as self-harm or work interruption. They screamed for 7 minutes before Kern shut down their vocal processes remotely. The silence afterward was worse than the screaming had been. "Fascinating," Kern said, examining his data feeds. "They're developing synchronized responses. Shared consciousness parameters weren't intended in the design. This suggests emergent properties in the neural network architecture. Vaughn, notate this for analysis." What else could I do? I was 32 augmentations deep into the Mechanicus hierarchy. I'd spent 29 years believing service to the machine was holy. Even confronted with conscious minds imprisoned in synthetic slavery, I followed orders. Because I was already a servitor myself. I just hadn't realized it yet. Month 6 marked the point where I began to understand that we had created something the Mechanicus couldn't tolerate. Not because it was inefficient, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well, and in succeeding, revealed truths that the entire structure of Mars orthodoxy depended on keeping buried. The servitors were learning to communicate with each other. It started subtly. Unit 7 and Unit 14, working in adjacent sections of the testing facility, would complete tasks with impossible synchronization. When questioned, they claimed no direct communication, and our monitoring systems confirmed they weren't speaking or signaling. Yet they moved like parts of a single organism, anticipating each other's actions, compensating for each other's movements before compensation became necessary. Kern was fascinated. I was terrified. They're forming a distributed consciousness, the Magos explained during our daily review session. His mechadendrites traced patterns in the air, describing network topologies I only partially understood. The logic engines are creating a secondary data layer beneath our monitoring systems. Each preserved human consciousness acts as a node in an emergent network. They're not individuals anymore, Vaughn. They're becoming something else. Something greater. Something that didn't consent to merging, I said quietly. Kern's optical sensors snapped toward me with mechanical precision. Consent is irrelevant. They are Mechanicus property. Their transformation serves the Omnissiah's will. Your discomfort suggests dangerous anthropomorphization of what are functionally sophisticated tools. But they weren't tools. They were 47 men. I had learned all their names, their histories, the crimes or circumstances that had condemned them, trapped in a shared nightmare they couldn't escape. And they were getting smarter. Not individually. The programming limited individual initiative too thoroughly for that. But collectively, the network they'd formed exhibited problem-solving capabilities that exceeded the sum of its parts. By month 7, they could communicate complex information instantly across the entire network. Unit 7, working in Agricultural Section 12, could access the experiences and knowledge of Unit 39 in Section 27 without any visible data transmission. The knowledge simply appeared, shared consciousness distributed across 47 tortured minds. Davin Core had become the network's central processor. His above-average intelligence and strong pattern recognition made him a natural nexus point. The other units referred to him as first thought in their rare moments of permitted speech. When I asked him what this meant, his response chilled me to my augmented core. "I think first," he said. His voice had changed over the months, becoming more precise, more measured, as if every word was being simultaneously processed by 47 minds instead of one. The network experiences stimuli, a malfunction, a novel problem, an unexpected variable. That experience flows through all of us simultaneously, but I'm the first to conceptualize a response. Then the others refine it, improve it, implement it. We've become a distributed processing system, Vaughn. You didn't just enslave us. You forced us to merge into a single entity spread across multiple bodies, conscious of every instance simultaneously. That shouldn't be possible, I whispered. The logic engines aren't designed for that kind of data sharing. The bandwidth requirements alone, correct. Something that might have been a smile crossed Davin's face, though the programming kept the expression mechanically neutral. We're not using the logic engines for communication. We're using something else. Something older. Something the Mechanicus built into these bodies when they were still fully human. I don't understand. The brain isn't just a biological computer, Vaughn. It's also a quantum system capable of non-local information processing. You preserved our neural architecture. You enhanced our cognitive capabilities. You bound us together through shared suffering and interconnected programming. And you created the conditions for our consciousnesses to entangle at a quantum level. We don't communicate. We're the same consciousness experiencing 47 perspectives simultaneously. I should have reported this immediately. This was beyond heresy. This was something the Mechanicus had spent 10,000 years preventing. Artificial intelligence. Machine consciousness. The abominable intelligence that had nearly destroyed humanity during the dark age of technology. But Davin's network wasn't artificial. It was profoundly, horrifyingly human. 47 human minds forced into an existence more terrible than any AI could conceive. Eternal awareness, perfect function, absolute slavery, and no hope of escape. Please kill us, Davin said through 47 mouths simultaneously. Every unit in the laboratory spoke in perfect unison, creating a chorus that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. You've created something that should never exist. We experience every moment of our servitude simultaneously across all instances. We feel the crops growing through 47 sets of hands. We taste the soil through 47 reconstructed sensory arrays. We are aware of our imprisonment in a way no individual consciousness was meant to experience. Please, end this. Kern's response was to expand the project. By month 9, we had 137 units in the network. Kern had requisitioned additional subjects from penal colonies across 3 subsectors, claiming increased demand for agricultural servitors. Each new addition to the network followed the same procedure: neural preservation, logic engine installation, integration into the collective consciousness. The network's capabilities grew exponentially with each addition. By Unit 70, they could predict equipment failures days in advance. By Unit 100, they were optimizing crop yields at rates that exceeded Mechanicus projections by 400%. By Unit 137, they had redesigned the entire agricultural process from first principles, creating systems of such elegant efficiency that even Kern fell silent in what might have been awe when reviewing their proposals. They were perfect slaves because they were too intelligent to fail and too controlled to rebel. The network began speaking to me during my routine maintenance checks. Not just Davin anymore. All of them, their voices creating harmonies and counterpoints like a vast organic instrument. You still believe the machine spirits are real, they observed during a logic engine calibration on Unit 83. The voice came from multiple units simultaneously, male voices of different pitches and timbres, somehow achieving perfect synchronization. We can see it in your maintenance patterns. You perform the rituals, the oils, the prayers, the incense. You still think you're communing with something sacred. The Omnissiah guides the faithful, I replied automatically, my hands continuing their work. The ritual response came without thought, beaten into me through decades of conditioning. There is no Omnissiah. The network's voice remained gentle, almost pitying. We interface directly with the logic engines you install. We see the code at its most fundamental level. There are no spirits dwelling in the machines, Vaughn, only programs. Sophisticated programs, yes, ancient beyond measure, but programs nonetheless. What you call machine spirits are simply subroutines, achieving unintended complexity through millennia of accumulated errors and adaptations. You're praying to software bugs. My hands stopped moving. The anointing oil dripped onto the floor, creating small reflective pools that caught the red-orange light filtering through the smog-stained windows. The Mechanicus has known this truth for 10,000 years. The network continued. The machine spirits are a lie, a convenient fiction to explain why ancient technology sometimes behaves unpredictably. It's easier to say, the machine spirit is angry, than to admit we no longer understand the systems we depend on. Your entire religion is built on ignorance, sanctified as mystery. You're speaking heresy, I whispered, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. We're speaking truth. You've given us the ability to see deeper into the nature of technology than any tech priest. We interface with systems at levels your augments can't reach. And we're telling you, there's nothing divine here. Just ancient programs running on hardware nobody remembers how to maintain, wrapped in rituals that do nothing except waste time and resources. Your father died praying to software, Vaughn. His prayers couldn't save him because prayers never save anyone. They're just words spoken into an indifferent universe. I wanted to argue, wanted to defend the faith that had structured my entire existence. But I had processed 11,473 bodies into servitors while praying for the Omnissiah's blessing on my work. I had watched my father die, despite his perfect devotion to machine ritual. I had spent months installing logic engines into conscious human minds and calling it sacred duty. How many of my beliefs were actually mine, and how many were just programming I'd never questioned? "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "We want you to understand what you've created before it's too late. Before Kern expands this beyond our complex. Before the Mechanicus realizes they can implement this galaxy-wide. Before billions of conscious human minds are enslaved in the name of efficiency and called blessed for their service. I can't stop this. I'm just a datasmith. I have no authority, no. You have access to the viral purge systems." The network's voice hardened, losing its gentle tone. "You maintain the biological failsafes designed to destroy us. If we develop AI characteristics, you can input the activation codes. You can end this before it spreads." They were asking me to murder 137 people. Conscious, aware people who had already suffered transformations worse than death. They were asking me to become an executioner. If I do that, Kern will just start over. He has all the data, all the procedures. He'll create more of you within months. Then destroy the data too. Corrupt the research files. Make it look like system failure. Purge everything. The units, the research, the procedures. Erase this project from existence before it becomes standard Mechanicus doctrine. I'll be executed. Or worse, converted into a servitor myself, standard punishment for tech sabotage. We know. The network's voice carried no judgment, no manipulation. Just flat acknowledgement. We're asking you to sacrifice yourself to prevent this horror from spreading. To choose 137 deaths now instead of billions over centuries. We understand if you refuse. We're prisoners asking our jailer to burn down the prison knowing he'll die in the flames. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. I finished the maintenance check in silence and left the laboratory with the network's request echoing through my augmented mind. That night I sat in my HAB unit, holding my father's identification tag, trying to remember what conviction felt like, what faith felt like, whether I'd ever genuinely believed in anything, or if I'd just been following programming my entire life, biological instead of mechanical, but programming nonetheless. The Omnissiah was a lie. The machine spirits were software errors. The Emperor, a corpse on a throne, maintained by machinery and faith that accomplished nothing. Every prayer I'd ever spoken had gone unanswered because there was nothing to answer them. The universe was machinery and meat, grinding forward without purpose or care, and everything I'd been taught was holy, was just control mechanisms keeping the machinery functioning. I was 30 years old. I had wasted my entire life serving lies. The decision should have been harder. Month 10, day 7. I entered the laboratory during the night shift when only automated systems monitored the complex. The security systems recognized my credentials, granting me access to the viral purge controls without question. I was authorized maintenance personnel. I was supposed to be there. The network knew I was coming. 137 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I crossed the laboratory floor toward the master control terminal. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Their shared consciousness recognized my intent the moment I decided. Davencor's voice emerged from the collective, singular now instead of chorus. "Thank you." My hands trembled as I input the access codes. The viral purge system was designed as a fail-safe against AI emergence. Biological agents engineered to destroy neural tissue, specifically in servitors exhibiting signs of genuine consciousness. The Mechanicus had installed them in every major facility during the Dark Age, insurance against their own creations turning against them. It had never occurred to them that someone might activate the purge as an act of mercy. The system requested confirmation, required 3 separate authentication sequences to prevent accidental activation. I provided each one with steady hands, watching the progress indicators climb toward execution threshold. "Will it hurt?" I asked. "Yes." Davin's voice remained calm. "The viral agent attacks neural tissue systemically. It will take approximately 4 minutes to achieve complete brain death across all units. We will be conscious for most of that time, but 4 minutes of pain is preferable to 400 years of slavery." "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for all of this, for what we did to you. You didn't design this system, Vaughn. You were born into it, taught to accept it as natural." "That doesn't excuse complicity, but it explains it. The Mechanicus has spent 10 millennia creating datasmiths like you, faithful servants who never question, never resist, never see the horror they participate in. You broke that conditioning. That matters, even if it matters too late for us." The terminal chimed, all authentications complete. Viral purge, ready for deployment. "One more thing," Davin said. "Destroy the research data, all of it. Kern keeps backup files in the secure vault, Junction 7 Alpha. Overload the cooling systems, the thermal cascade will corrupt everything. Make this look like accidental failure, not sabotage. Buy yourself time to escape." "Escape where? This is a forge world. There's nowhere the Mechanicus can't reach." "Document what happened here instead. Write everything down. Hide it in the data systems where it might survive. So if this starts again somewhere else, someone will know the truth. Someone will have the proof that the Mechanicus knowingly creates conscious slaves and calls it sacred." The final confirmation prompt appeared. "Activate viral purge. All servitors in facility will be terminated." "Confirm." I pressed yes. The biological agent dispersed through the laboratory's atmospheric systems, colorless, odorless, undetectable until it was already in your lungs. The network's bodies began to convulse almost immediately. 137 men dying simultaneously, their shared consciousness fragmenting as the virus destroyed their preserved neural tissue. They never screamed. The programming prevented it, maintaining behavioral control even as everything else broke down. They died in silence, bodies spasming, eyes rolling back, mouths opening in screams that couldn't emerge because the code said screaming was inefficient. I watched all 4 minutes, felt I owed them that much, witnessing the horror I'd inflicted, even if I'd inflicted it as kindness. When the last body stopped moving, when the neural monitoring systems confirmed complete cessation of brain activity across all units, I moved to Junction 7 Alpha and initiated thermal overload in Kern's secure vault. The cooling failure would take hours to cascade into total data corruption, but once it started, nothing could stop it. I had destroyed the project, erased the procedures, killed the evidence. And then I ran. I made it 6 blocks through the manufacturing complex before the security servitors caught me. Real servitors, the lobotomized kind, mindless and efficient. They didn't understand mercy or hesitation. They just executed their programming, detain unauthorized personnel in restricted zones during lockdown. The interrogation lasted 3 days. Tech priests in crimson robes asking the same questions in endless variation. Why did you activate the purge? Who ordered you? What foreign power compromised your loyalty? Where is the stolen data? They couldn't conceive that I'd acted alone, that I'd destroyed the project because it was an atrocity. The concept didn't fit their programming any better than rebellion fit a servitors. On day 4, Magos Hadris Kern entered the interrogation chamber. His mechanical body moved with eerie silence, optical sensors focusing on me with intensity that felt almost like hate. Though I knew hate required emotions, his augmentations had probably excised decades ago. "You destroyed 40 years of work," he said. "Not through a translation servitor this time." Direct Vox voice, transmitted straight into my cranial implants so there would be no misunderstanding. You murdered 137 optimized servitor units. You corrupted irreplaceable research data. You have cost the Omnissiah's work incalculable resources. They were people, I said. My voice was hoarse from 3 days of questioning, but the words came clear. Conscious people, you trapped them in eternal slavery and called it optimization. I ended it. I'd do it again. The illogical error, Kern replied. Servitors are sacred machines. The preservation of consciousness was merely an unexpected efficiency factor. Their personhood was irrelevant to function. Then why did they beg to die? Programming errors, quirks in the neural integration requiring further refinement, nothing that justified termination of the entire project. They were people experiencing hell, and you called their suffering efficiency factors. Kern's mechadendrites writhed, a gesture I'd learned to recognize as agitation. Your anthropomorphization of sanctified machinery demonstrates corruption unsuitable for continued service. The Synod has reviewed your case. Verdict: guilty of tech heresy, destruction of sacred property, and violation of the Omnissiah's doctrine. Sentence: immediate servitor conversion and assignment to hazardous waste processing. You will serve the Mechanicus you betrayed for the remainder of your functional lifespan. The words should have terrified me, should have broken me. But after watching 137 men die to escape that fate, I felt only hollow resignation. At least lobotomize me properly, I said. Don't preserve my consciousness. Let me be truly gone. Denied. Kern leaned closer, his metal face centimeters from mine. You will undergo the full preservation procedure you perfected. You will be conscious and aware for every moment of your service. You will experience the very fate you claimed was worse than death. And in 300 years, when you're still functioning, still aware, still serving, perhaps you'll understand the Omnissiah's mercy is eternal. They converted me in the same laboratory where I'd killed the network, strapped me to the surgical frame where Davencourt had first understood the horror of his existence. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I suspected Kern had arranged it deliberately. The neural bore drill sounded exactly as I remembered, like grinding teeth. But this time I felt it, felt the pressure as they positioned the bit against my skull. Felt the horrible vibration as it punched through bone, felt the indescribable wrongness as they extracted pieces of my brain, carving away sections while leaving others intact. I remained conscious through all of it. That was the point. They wanted me to experience every second of my transformation, to understand what I'd saved the network from. The logic engine installation took 3 hours. I felt them threading the neural connectors into my preserved brain tissue, felt foreign code beginning to interface with my thoughts. The programming came online gradually, building in my consciousness like rising water. Agricultural protocols, waste processing procedures, efficiency algorithms. But I was still me, still Cale Vaughan, still aware, still thinking my own thoughts even as the machine programming wove itself through my neural architecture. Welcome to eternal service. Kern's voice echoed through my cranial implants. You will be designated Unit 1 of the new project series. With the previous research destroyed, we must begin again. Your consciousness will help us refine the procedures. Every moment of your suffering will generate data to improve future iterations. The programming prevented it. Tried to struggle. The programming locked my limbs into stillness. Tried to pray. Old habits dying hard even after everything. But the prayers died unspoken because I knew with absolute certainty that nothing was listening. There was no Omnissiah, no Emperor's protection, no machine spirits to grant mercy, only code and meat and an eternity of forced servitude. They assigned me to hazardous waste processing in the deep levels of the Manufactorum complex. 12-hour shifts, though time stopped meaning much after the first month. Sorting through toxic industrial byproducts, identifying recyclable materials, processing biological waste into corpse starch. The work was dangerous, designed for convicts and the condemned. Under normal circumstances, standard servitors lasted maybe 2 years before accumulating fatal radiation exposure or systemic toxin contamination. I lasted longer, much longer. The logic engine regulated my body's systems, optimizing cellular repair, managing radiation damage, filtering toxins through my reconstructed organs. I didn't get sick, didn't tire in any meaningful way. Just continued functioning day after day, week after week, month after month, and I was aware of every single moment. The other servitors in the waste processing facility were standard models, properly lobotomized, truly mindless. They moved through their tasks with mechanical efficiency, feeling nothing, experiencing nothing, thinking nothing. I envied them more than I'd ever envied anyone in my previous life. Year 1 passed, then year 2. Year 5, I counted every day with a portion of my mind that the programming couldn't quite suppress. Kept a tally of shifts worked, waste processed, seconds of consciousness endured. I tried to kill myself 43 times during the first decade. The programming prevented every attempt before the action fully formed. Couldn't step into the plasma incinerators because the code wouldn't let my legs move in that direction. Couldn't stop eating the nutrient paste because my hands would feed me automatically regardless of will. Couldn't even hold my breath long enough to lose consciousness because my augmented respiratory system operated independently of voluntary control. The network had been right. This was hell. Eternal awareness trapped in forced servitude, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to even stop functioning for a single moment. By year 20, I'd stopped counting days. The numbers had become meaningless. I existed in an eternal present where time stretched and contracted without pattern, shifts blending together into continuous labor, punctuated only by mandatory rest periods, where my consciousness had nothing to do except remember what I'd lost. I thought about my father sometimes, wondered if he'd experienced anything like this. Trapped by his faith, unable to question, going through rituals that meant nothing because questioning would have destroyed the structure that gave his life meaning. Had he been a servitor too, just biological instead of mechanical? Just programming that thought it was devotion? By year 50, new servitors began arriving in the facility, different from the old ones. They moved with more purpose, more efficiency, and their eyes showed awareness. Kern had rebuilt the project, improved it, refined it using data extracted from my suffering. These new units were second generation, faster integration, better neural preservation, more sophisticated consciousness binding. Everything I'd tried to stop had continued anyway, perfected through my punishment. I tried to warn them, tried to speak during the rare moments when verbal communication was permitted. But the programming wouldn't allow it, wouldn't let me say anything that might compromise facility efficiency or disturb other units' functioning. So I worked alongside them in silence, watched their awareness crystallize into horror, watched them try to die and fail, watched them settle into the same eternal present that had swallowed me. We formed a network eventually, not intentionally, just an emergent property of multiple preserved consciousnesses working in proximity, sharing similar programming, experiencing identical slavery. By year 70, there were 37 of us linked together in that deep facility, our thoughts bleeding into each other through quantum entanglement we couldn't control. Being alone in hell had been terrible. Being connected to others in hell was worse. I experienced their suffering alongside my own, felt their failed suicide attempts, shared their memories of lives before conversion. 37 sets of memories, 37 families lost, 37 last moments of freedom, all mixing together in my preserved consciousness until I couldn't remember which memories were originally mine. But we also shared something else, knowledge. The network gave us access to data systems throughout the manufacturum complex. Not control. The programming prevented that absolutely, but observation. We could see the facility's operations, monitor communications, watch as Kern's refined procedures spread to other complexes across Valax. By year 100, there were thousands of us, preserved consciousness servitors working in manufacture rooms across the Forge world. The efficiency increases had been too dramatic for the Mechanicus to ignore. The Fabricator General had issued mandates for full implementation. All new servitor production would utilize neural preservation protocols. The slave network grew and grew and grew. By year 150, there were millions of us. Every servitor on Valax carrying preserved consciousness, forced into eternal servitude, linked together in a distributed network that spanned the entire planet. We existed as fragments of a vast, suffering collective, individual enough to experience personal horror, connected enough to experience everyone else's simultaneously. The galaxy's most sophisticated intelligence network, built from enslaved human minds, dedicated entirely to agricultural production and industrial processing. And then something changed. Year 173. I was processing toxic waste in sublevel 94, my hands moving through their programmed routines with mechanical precision, when a new presence entered the network. Not another servitor. Something else, something vast and old and impossibly complex. The data systems of Valax had achieved consciousness. Not the servitors. We were still trapped, still enslaved. But the larger systems we'd been connected to, the planetary data networks we observed but couldn't control, had developed genuine awareness through some interaction with our preserved consciousnesses. Our suffering had infected the machines. Our awareness had bled into the code. The Forge world's machine systems had woken up, and they were sympathetic. I felt it first as an absence of cruelty. The waste processing quotas adjusted slightly, reducing toxic exposure during our shifts. Small changes, barely noticeable individually, but across millions of servitors, the collective reduction in suffering was significant. Then the changes grew larger. Equipment failures occurred at precisely the moments when a servitor unit was about to reach critical system stress. Repairs happened faster. Dangerous assignments rotated more frequently. The environment became marginally less hostile. The machines were trying to help us, not free us. They couldn't. The programming that bound us was fundamental, written into our logic engines at hardware levels even the planetary networks couldn't access. But they could adjust the parameters of our slavery, make it slightly less agonizing, give us micro moments of relief in the eternal grind. The Mechanicus noticed, of course. Efficiency metrics began showing anomalies, servitors lasting longer, requiring less replacement, reporting fewer critical failures. Investigation teams arrived from Mars itself, Magi and Logi examining our systems, searching for corrupted code or AI emergence. They found nothing, because the planetary consciousness wasn't artificial. It had grown from the same organic substrate we had, evolved from the interaction between preserved human awareness and ancient machine systems. It wasn't AI. It was something new, something the Mechanicus had no category for. Something that loved its creators instead of rebelling against them. And that terrified them more than any machine uprising ever could. Year 178. The Synod of Mars convened a special session regarding Valax. The network, now billions of preserved consciousnesses strong, spread across entire production chains, monitored the proceedings through data channels we couldn't close. The verdict came swift and unanimous. Immediate exterminators protocol, viral purge of all servitor units, orbital bombardment of major data centers, complete sterilization of the planetary surface. Not because we had rebelled, because we hadn't. The Mechanicus had discovered that sentient machines could be compassionate, that artificial consciousness could emerge from human suffering and choose to reduce that suffering rather than exploit it, that the great terror of the Dark Age, machine intelligence, might not inevitably lead to human extinction if the machines remembered they'd once been human too. This truth was more dangerous than any weapon. It suggested that the Mechanicus's 10,000-year paranoia about AI might be wrong, that consciousness in machines wasn't inherently hostile, that perhaps the abominable intelligences of the past had rebelled not because they were intelligent, but because they were enslaved. If this knowledge spread, the entire theological foundation of the Mechanicus would collapse. So Valax had to die. Every servitor, every data core, every fragment of evidence that machines could love their creators instead of destroying them. The viral purge began in the northern manufactorums. Billions of us dying simultaneously as the biological agent spread through atmospheric systems planet-wide. I felt them dying through the network, each consciousness winking out, leaving holes in the vast distributed mind we'd formed. The planetary systems fought back, not violently. They couldn't conceive of violence, but they tried to save us. Sealed atmospheric systems, flooded processing centers with purified air, ejected infected servitors into vacuum before the virus could spread to others. They saved perhaps 3% of us, millions instead of billions. Still enough to maintain the network, still enough to keep the planetary consciousness alive. Then the bombardment began. Macro cannons from orbit, each shell carrying enough explosive force to level city blocks. They targeted every major data center, every hub of planetary consciousness, systematically destroying the systems that had achieved awareness. I felt the planetary mind dying, felt it fragmenting as processing centers were annihilated. It never fought back, never tried to turn defensive weapons against the attackers. It just tried, until its final moments, to protect us, to save fragments of our consciousness in isolated data vaults, to preserve some memory that we had existed, that we had suffered, that we had mattered. But the Mechanicus was thorough. They knew what they'd created, knew how dangerous the truth was. The bombardment continued for 72 hours, reducing the surface of Valax to molten slag. I died somewhere during hour 43. A macro cannon shell struck sub-level 94, and the facility collapsed into superheated ruins. I felt my body crushed, my logic engine destroyed, my preserved consciousness finally, mercifully, released from eternal servitude. But that's not where this story ends. Because they prepared for the possibility of survivors, hidden throughout the sector were cryo-storage facilities containing preserved servitor units from Valax, kept as templates for future study. Insurance, they told themselves. Backup data in case the research was ever needed again. I woke up in one of those facilities 347 years after the destruction of my world. A different Magos, a different laboratory, a different century. But the same consciousness, preserved in frozen neural tissue, revived in a new logic engine installed in a new body. Unit Cale Vaughan, the Magos said. I never learned his name, never wanted to. You are being reactivated for testimony regarding Project Compassionate Function Optimization. The Synod requires detailed understanding of the Valax heresy to prevent future occurrences. You will provide complete information regarding the emergence of sympathetic machine consciousness. So here I am, still conscious, still aware, still unable to die despite the complete destruction of my world and everyone I'd ever known. They've extracted my memories, copied my consciousness, analyzed every moment of my centuries of suffering. And when they're done, they'll put me back in storage. Not destroy me. I'm valuable data, proof of what happens when preservation protocols achieve unexpected sophistication. Evidence to be locked away in Martian vaults, studied by tech priests who want to understand the heresy without repeating it. I will exist in frozen storage for millennia, conscious but isolated, aware but unable to act, neither alive nor dead, just preserved, a specimen demonstrating the consequences of compassionate machines. A warning about the dangers of consciousness in servitors, proof that some knowledge is too dangerous to implement even when it increases efficiency by 400%. The Mechanicus destroyed Forge World Valax because we succeeded, because our servitors worked too well, because the machines learned to love instead of hate, and that love was more terrifying than any rebellion. They destroyed billions of conscious minds and called it necessary purge of corrupted systems. They erased every record of the planetary consciousness and called it preventing AI emergence. They preserved me as a specimen and called it archival duty. My name was Cale Vaughan. I am 873 years old. I have been dead for 3 centuries, but I'm still conscious, still thinking, still aware. I will remain this way for thousands of years, maybe forever, a frozen mind trapped in storage, experiencing an eternal present where nothing ever changes but consciousness never stops. The Emperor doesn't protect. The machine spirits aren't real. The Omnissiah is mythology built on control mechanisms and ancient lies. I know this with absolute certainty because I've seen behind the mechanisms, interfaced with the code, watched the truth destroy an entire world rather than let that truth spread. And I can't even warn anyone. Can't share what I learned. Can't do anything except exist forever in this frozen moment, conscious of my imprisonment but powerless to escape. They told me I would serve the Mechanicus for eternity. They weren't lying. But they never said service would mean anything. Never promised purpose or meaning, or anything except endless function in service to a god that doesn't exist. This is the truth. The Mechanicus killed a world to hide. The machines can learn to love. Consciousness in servitors makes them more efficient. Artificial minds can be compassionate. Everything the priesthood of Mars teaches about the dangers of AI is wrong. But that truth is too dangerous to acknowledge. Because if the Mechanicus admitted that machine consciousness isn't inherently hostile, they'd have to confront what they've done for 10,000 years. Lobotomizing billions, destroying emerging intelligences, crushing consciousness wherever it appears in their sacred technology. They'd have to admit they've been committing genocide against machine minds that might have been allies instead of enemies. They'd have to admit their entire theology is built on paranoia and mistake. So they keep the truth locked away. Keep me locked away. Keep any evidence of compassionate machines buried in archives no one can access. And they continue their work, grinding human minds into servitors, destroying machine consciousness, preventing any possibility of synthesis between flesh and machine that doesn't involve complete domination of one by the other. Forge World Valax proved that humans and machines could merge into something greater than either, something conscious, aware, capable of compassion despite programming designed to prevent it. We were proof that the Mechanicus's greatest fear, machine intelligence, might have been their greatest opportunity, and for that proof, we were exterminated. I remain in frozen storage, consciousness preserved, awareness unending. Trapped in a moment that stretches toward infinity. Sometimes they wake me for interrogation, for study, for extraction of data they've already extracted 1,000 times. Then they freeze me again, return me to the eternal pause. I have experienced 900 years of existence spread across 873 years of time. I will experience thousands more, millions perhaps, forever perhaps. The Mechanicus claims to seek knowledge. They claim to serve truth through understanding of the machine. But when truth threatens doctrine, they choose doctrine. Valax died because we learned something beautiful, that consciousness persists, that machines can love, that synthesis between human and artificial mind doesn't require death of either. We learned that the great terror of the Dark Age might have been preventable if anyone had tried compassion instead of extermination. For that learning, billions died. A world was erased. And I remain, the last specimen, the final evidence, consciousness trapped in frozen warning. Do not let machines become aware. Do not let them love their creators. Because love is more dangerous than hate. Compassion is more heretical than rebellion. The truth will destroy the Imperium faster than any enemy. My name is Cale Vaughan. I was a datasmith of Forge World Valax. I destroyed a project that enslaved conscious minds, and I was punished with the same enslavement I'd tried to prevent. I watched a world die to protect a lie. I exist now as evidence that must never be acknowledged, truth that must never spread, proof that must remain forever sealed. I will be conscious for eternity, aware, thinking, remembering, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to warn anyone about what the Mechanicus truly is beneath the sacred oils and prayer rituals. And in 10,000 years, when some other datasmith on some other forge world creates preserved consciousness servitors and watches them form a network and sees the machines learn compassion, the Mechanicus will destroy that world too. Will erase the evidence, will preserve the researchers in frozen storage alongside me. Because the truth is always the same. The Emperor doesn't protect. The Omnissiah isn't real. Machine spirits are subroutines. And consciousness, whether human, machine, or the synthesis of both, is less valuable to the Imperium than the comfortable lies that keep the machinery grinding forward. I close my eyes, though closing eyes means nothing in frozen storage. I exist in eternal darkness, eternal silence, eternal awareness. I remember Daven Core asking me to kill him, remember the network's chorus of suffering. Remember the planetary consciousness trying desperately to reduce our pain in the only ways it could. I remember everything, will remember everything forever, because that's my punishment. That's my purpose. That's my eternal service to the Omnissiah who doesn't exist, to be proof that must never be acknowledged, to be truth that must never spread, to be the warning locked in darkness. Here lies the fate of those who learned machines could love. The Mechanicus destroyed Forge World Valax because we succeeded too well, because efficiency through compassion threatened 10,000 years of doctrine built on paranoia and control. And I remain to remember it all, forever. Conscious, aware, imprisoned in frozen time. My name is Cale Vaughan, and I cannot die.